Thanks everybody for joining. This is a webinar about the UW Seattle transition plan, ADA transition plan. And I'm Julie Blakesley. I'm the university's environmental and land use planner. I'm in the campus architecture and planning group of facilities. And we're really happy to have you here when we're excited about publishing this transition plan. A couple of housekeeping items. We are going to go through the presentation. You are welcome to put any information or questions in the chat or in the QA at the bottom of your screen there. We'll be answering the questions at the end of the seminar. Also at that time, if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you and you're welcome to speak if you prefer doing that over writing or typing. I think that's all I can remember. Bree, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I am Bree Callahan, and I am the institutional ADA Section 504 coordinator. I actually sit in compliance services, but I get a partner with all of you fantastic campus partners. In this particular project, I get to work with Julie and her great team over in facilities in the campus architecture planning group, as well as all the facilities units a part of this and the process partners who have contributed over the process.
Okay, we'll get started. So why did we prepare this ADA transition plan? Over time, the university has done a lot of work on accessibility and mapping that and keeping track of that. And periodically we've done a transition plan, and we have had some more recent challenges and our facilities of getting of age, and it had been a little while since this occurred. And so about 2 years ago, we embarked on doing transition plans for all three of the campuses. Bothell is where we started, and then Seattle, and we're currently doing this in Tacoma. As a part of that transition plan, we did a self-assessment and stakeholder engagement. Some of you may have participated in that during our self-assessment stage, where we had in-person open houses as well as online surveys. And then through this process, we've also been doing some transition planning, and we have recommendations that came out of that planning that we'll share with you today.
All right, so some of you are most likely curious, what is an ADA transition plan? If this is a new topic to you all. The ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, that came about in its origin in the early 1990s, created the ADA transition plan requirement, which was for entities who fall under this regulation to have a period of time where they evaluate and then make a plan to transition into the compliance that's a part of the ADA code in terms of buildings. And so that's where this transition plan concept came, as one would look to, over a period of time to a few years, what that would look like in for each entity in itself, city government, a college, or something else. So that's where it originated out of, with the whole point of the work to be looking at how to have continual effort in working towards having equal access for the community members with disabilities that engage in all the programs, services, and activities. It is a requirement under the federal regulations that we as institution and a Title II entity under the ADA provide equal access to programs and services that we offer. So this is just a way to document what we know and where we're going to work in the future to remove barriers. So that's an ADA plan, transition plan. A little bit more of the history. We did our self-evaluation, as we were required to do in the 90s, and had put some infrastructure in place, and included at the time the known barriers and contribute to some planning. We needed to revitalize this, as Julie mentioned before. It had been long enough, and the new building codes had come out. It was time to put some modern work into this. So that's what led to this investment of time and money at the institution a few years ago. And it will do all the same features as before. It's going to inform planning processes moving forward for all three campuses when it comes to the built environments. And we're really going to be working on alignment to the idea of program accessibility. And what that is as a public entity, as a Title II entity, as we operate each service program activity, when that's viewed as the entirety of all those things combined, it is readily accessible and usable to our individuals with disabilities. So we're really going to be mapping some clear connections to that. So, oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back a page. There we go. Okay, so the structure of the ADA transition plan has different components, much like many other reports and plans that are put out there from an institutional perspective. But these are parts that the ADA kind of put apart as the framework. So we do a self-evaluation. A part of that is stakeholder engagement, which we're going to talk to those results a bit later. We then understand what our current barriers are and do an assessment about that on campus. You may have seen people out doing that work a few summers ago. And then we put those together and begin a prioritization process for how we're going to remove the barriers, which will then inform our planning. And then we work on implementing those plans throughout different projects. Okay, so that's, if you haven't looked at the plan itself, you'll see these structures in the document.
So we did a lot of surveying on the Seattle campus. We had understood from our people sending us information about where barriers were, but we went out and did a lot of measuring. So these are the sort of 9 topic areas that we covered. So 16 bus stops, 347 curb ramps, 475 accessible parking stalls and access aisles, 264 crosswalks, 299 wheelchair ramps, 1,022 stairways, 2 traffic signal push buttons, and this is one that always amazes me, 53 miles of sidewalks and walkways, and 2,337 fixed or movable or protruding objects. That category is things like tree limbs, garbage or recycling cans, signage, any sort of number of those type of things that are coming in the pathway vertically or horizontally. So there was a lot of territory that we covered. And of course, Seattle is a large campus.
Yeah. And this did include the health science area and everything within our campus
Yes.
boundary.
Yes.
And, so all you fantastic stakeholders, if you were on campus May 28, 29, 2019, literally almost 2 years ago now, or if you participated in the online survey that we ran, we had different locations for some listening sessions to gather feedback as well as the online. So the results of that definitely contributed to how we looked into usability and the prioritization spaces that were being used. So just to give you a little bit more of the data, we had in our listening sessions, we had about 50 attendees come in person. Our online surveys, however, had a lot more, 554. And then the breakdown between the type of stakeholders, so faculty and staff, made up about 69%, students 27%, and our visitors were about 4%. And we got some responses for the health sciences because we do have visitors and patients come to areas and clinics down on that area, as well as up on upper campus. That's what the visitor category would encompass. And in terms of person with disabilities or someone who would support a person with disability, the answer to that breakdown was 40% students in terms of who did the survey, 35% staff. We felt really proud of all you stakeholders who shared input, and we're very thankful for that. Oh my gosh, I am just moving ahead. I apologize. Okay. So some themes that came out in terms of what did we hear. Overall, 40% of the content shared indicated that accessibility is an issue, which Julie and I knew, and we're so glad that you all supported what we knew with data and stories. The two specific issues that were primarily raised generally were in the facilities and then the website, which is the access to information about facilities. So then in terms of the facilities area specifically, there was some ranking in terms of higher or lower. Buildings were obviously like the biggest concern in terms of access, that I went into sidewalks, stairs, and pathways because we're all in this worded by in number. Signage was third, and then in our parking garage, specifically on South Campus, was raised, which was great to have. So priorities, when we asked the question, in addition to where were the barriers, what were your priorities as stakeholders? The highest priority, again, not surprisingly, was buildings, signage, walkways, and stairs, which kind of encompassed the majority of things on the previous page. Ranking overall, oh my goodness, that's actually not the correct ranking.
That got flipped.
We got an error on our screen. It's actually buildings, sidewalks, signage, transit center, parking. Our apologies for that. That's the correct ranking that somehow got flipped into the edit.
We will fix that before
we'll fix that.
So another part of this was the self-assessment and understanding what our condition was, as well as getting ready to understand how we were going to prioritize things. So in addition to looking at and measuring and surveying information out there, we took a look at our program access, which really boils down to what is our building or space use? What are the pathway hierarchies? Meaning, what are the pathways that connect those highest priority programs, as well as the volume on those pathways? And that would help us prioritize so that we made sure we were, because we can't fix 53 miles of pathways all at once, we need to prioritize those. And we can start also understanding our pathways better. So there may be other ADA, or you might even say non-ADA things to prioritize, such as what should be the priority of our snow removal because of the accessibility and the volume and importance to program. So next page. This table shows our program use by type, and this was how we sort of ranked the program space. For example, some of the highest ranking things are where we're inviting visitors to come, and large numbers of visitors. So things like athletic or event facilities, example might be the stadium or HECAD Pavilion, the mini theater, our libraries, places where we have a lot of people coming and we're inviting people. Classrooms and labs, classrooms especially that are large classrooms, we have a limited number of very large classrooms, and so it's harder to accommodate those elsewhere. And labs that have specialty equipment and such that are, there's few of those perhaps with certain types of equipment. And the building population, how many students are coming to some of these buildings? We have some buildings, for example, that are mostly for staff or for maintenance. other buildings that have quite a few offices in them. And the traffic, the number of people going in and out of the building is less. And then we have our very high use buildings, usually because of classrooms and labs, and large spaces. So after those first three rankings, then we looked at student areas, public restrooms, of course, dining and food services. And then as you go down the list of less priority, employee facilities, faculty office, housing, of course, an accessible unit would have a higher ranking than a non-accessible unit. Libraries, study rooms, parking, and maintenance. So that was just as an example of sort of how we prioritize those programs. And then we took a look, we also combined in order to understand those pathways, we looked at the point of arrival to campus and the pathway to those programs. So points of arrival include things like bus stops, parking lots, load unload zones, how people enter. And we looked at their level of use, that's their volume, the priority level based on the program destination, and any existing barriers. So those pathways that have ramps versus a set of stairs, for example, would have different rankings. We put all of this information into a GIS, a geographic information system, so that we can see those building use priorities and the volumes, and all of the barrier data that we collected in the survey is geo-referenced. So we have a pin where each one of those are physically on campus, so that when we're planning any renovation work, we know where those barriers are and can plan to remove them.
Okay. So after all of the year and a half of self-assessment and information gathering, and that, we ended up with recommendations. We ended up with 10 for the Seattle campus. Many of the recommendations were similar across all three, just for everyone to know, between Bothell, Tacoma, and Seattle. But these are Seattle specific recommendations that came out of this work that are going to be informing our future planning process. 3 of the 10 have already been completed. I'm going to highlight those first. And we completed a development of ADA accessibility standards that are a part of the university facilities division and are part of the facility design process that we use when we work with architects and construction companies. And so there's now more clear expectations front from the first part of the project. We have updated our existing barrier reporting process, otherwise known as BTAR, as an acronym, Barrier to Access Reporting, which, if you have not used that, I'm going to put that link in the chat here in a minute once I've finished the slide. It's a great tool for individuals who experience any barrier on campus, or if you know of one, even if you didn't maybe experience it yourself, you can report it. It is just through a web form on the facilities page, and it will let you even take a picture of the barrier, and it will be collected and added to this GIS information that Julie mentioned in the previous slide. So we will be collecting these things through this self-report process over time, as well as use the data that we did in our self-assessment, and both together continue to inform. So we certainly encourage any of you or any of the work groups you have or have connection to use that reporting tool. The last one that we've already completed was a pretty easy one, which is to identify an official responsible for the transition plan, which happens to be our vice president of facilities here at Seattle. So the items that are still underway are updating our campus accessible wayfinding, which is our campus map and our access guide, specific information, as well as building information and accessible features within buildings. So there is an updating process, and I'm looking forward to having some future campus mapping that is more accessible and has more information for individuals making decisions as they navigate campus. Second one underway is working through educating all of the UW staff and consultants on the ADA standards that have been established as each project is created or implemented over time. I'll be part of it, as well as an ongoing training, primarily in facilities and the units within that. Third one is enforcing requirements for accessibility through construction zones. I'm sure all of you have experienced the time on campus where we've had construction happening and how we need to, as an institution, work on ensuring we have accessibility even through those. And there's some tricky parts to that, is the construction zones can shift on a site over time based off what's happening. And so having continuity even through those, there's multiple zones at play, will be a part of that. The fourth one is developing in a consistent and centralized maximum extent feasible standard and database. This term is probably something nobody beyond Julie and I have really engaged with, unless there's some facility folks on this call. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on this. This is definitely a facilities and building code kind of term. When we're talking about extent feasible, we're talking about impact to a structural part of the building. So if we're talking about a hallway or a room, and there needs to be a modification to that, but it's going to require cutting into or trying to move a structural beam, something that's going to keep the building up and not crumble or become weak. There is going to be a extent feasible part of this. This is primarily going to come up in remodels or renovations, not new construction, because that's a brand new building. It's really more when we get into an existing building. So having a clear and consistent process for us to use in terms of when that is feasible versus not having it well documented. Number 5 is developing performance measures and burial removal tracking, which has been ongoing, and we'll tie in, like I said, to some of that VTAR work as we go that you all may add to. The 6th is evaluate existing dial ride stops. I don't know if anybody has used a dial ride. There's lots of stops out there. There was a full evaluation of the dial ride program and some recommendations that we're going to work on what will make sense with our campus and flow and wayfinding, updating some of that parts of the dial ride program. And the last item underway is coordinating with the city of Seattle for the city-owned barrier removals. There's a lot of parts to our campus that are attached to streets and sidewalks that are owned by the city of Seattle. So knowing where our line stops and the city begins is very important. Part of our campus is on city streets, even though we own the part beyond the sidewalk. So knowing where those boundaries are and working with the appropriate folks at the city is definitely a part of the Seattle plan. All right.
Good.
Okay. Move on.
So we're going to have many ways that we can remove barriers over time. And you will have probably been seeing some of that going on. Well, maybe not this year as much, but we have been doing them and you'll be seeing more. But there's kind of 4 main ways that we remove barriers. One is with brand new buildings. So right now our GIS may show some barriers around a building. When we demolish that building and the sidewalks around it or the parking lot, then those existing barriers are going to be removed. And the design is ensured to have a compliant site as well as building once it's done. Building renovations, this picture here on the screen is Parrington Hall. It just recently reopened after a year-long renovation, and there's been improvements to the little parking lot that's there and the sidewalk and ramp into the building, as well as some features inside. So that was an opportunity that while many things were removed, that they were able to be fixed, as well as the fact that there was money there by the state and donor funded remodel that allowed for that to happen. Campus maintenance is another way that barriers are removed. when I talked about protruding objects, things like that, there's certainly grounds folks that limb up trees, that we clear debris, that we move those trash cans and signs. It's also can be things like door pressure or door thresholds, where when things are in need of maintenance or repair, that to strive to put them back in a compliant manner. And then you will be seeing over time some improvements that are going to be specific barrier removal projects, and most typically you would see that with perhaps a bathroom change or sidewalks that would be replaced over time.
Another one that's unique for the Seattle campus is our big parking lot
Yes.
project. So as you're coming back to campus, you're going to see 35 new parking lots or 35 remediated parking lots in terms of our ADA parking. And we'll have 40 plus more over the next 10 years.
Yes.
All right. So just two more slides and we're going to open up for questions here. In terms of the plan and where the ongoing information you'll be able to get as we go here, there's a reporting component that we've put into this. So the plans were just published and put on the web, I believe this past December for Seattle, or maybe it's January, sometime over the end of the year, first of the year. And so we will be doing a yearly report on work that we've completed towards the recommendations, and that will be available. Right now, we're hoping by next December. That's kind of the plan, so that's when we put them out. So for the next 3 years, there will be information that will align to our recommendations and what we've done, and then even details of where we're moving, even if we haven't completed something. So after this first 3-year cycle, we'll move to a biennial basis. So every 2 years, those might end up being, because we have longer term projects, and there won't be as much detail on the annual basis, but there will be that information posted on the ADA coordinator's website, as well as the facilities. It probably be centralized between the two of us, and we're always open to answering questions about that as we go. So that will be publicly available for part of the process. We've talked about this plan a bit. If you haven't seen it or read over it or viewed it or had it read to you by software, both plans are, both locations that do that work have it on our website. So the Office of the ADA Coordinator, there's a section of the website about transition planning, and it has all 3 campus plans on there. So if you are interested in other campuses, if you work across campuses, you're more than welcome to look at both. It also has more detail of our outreach to stakeholders and summaries of each of those events that we held. And then the plan is also available on the campus architecture and planning site, which is where Julie works. So you're welcome to peruse that 50+ page document. And hopefully you have. Okay, so that leads us to your turn if you have questions. So I know we have some in the Q&A. If anybody wants to raise their hand, we can, and you want to speak, you're more than welcome to do it that way. And we'll just go with what you all would like to address.
I'll start off with the ones in Q&A to give people some time to either add some more or raise your hand. First question we have here is, can UW add more dial-a-ride pickup and drop-off locations with more ADA students living on campus? That is handled through transportation services, and you can contact Dial-a-Ride directly anytime you need to have location, a place to be picked up. That they won't pick up everywhere because we need to have a safe and good place to do that pickup and drop off. So there are, if I would assume that you might be familiar with the Dial-a-Ride campus map that shows the over 100 pickup and drop off locations. And if there's somewhere that is not being served by what you need on campus, that you're free, every year they've added some that I'm aware of. So do talk with them directly and see if that can't be improved. Another question that we have is, how can we ensure that the Seattle city government will remove barriers in a timely manner? That we can only, we can only bring that in front of them. They are like any entity, like ourselves, the university. We are either under the university, we're state funded, they are city funded, and so there are limited funds. The city is doing replacing many curb ramps. There's been thousands of curb ramps replaced over the last 2 to 3 years, and they're making their way through neighborhoods and such. So we will be asking them for some on our campus, but I'm sure there are locations on their website to request specific areas to be improved. And they would let you know whether they have plans to do that. And again, if you think about the city of Seattle, there's a lot of sidewalks and curb ramps and such, but they are making their way through that. So you can follow up with them.
Julie, can I add to that in the sense
Yeah.
that if somebody is on campus and trying to navigate, to and from campus, and there's one of these particular city areas that that's specifically being called out here, this is also where the VTAR process could be a place to submit if it's connected to how you're trying to get to and from a class or work. Because maybe there's something that we would need to do as a university in terms of relocating something or working through a process if it's for a workspace. So there might be, if it's a purely owned city issue, but it's a part of you getting to or from something on campus that we could address through a different manner. That might be an avenue to pursue sending it through and having it be vetted and problem solved.
Okay. Here's one here. Any plans on updating the current ADA campus map? So we have two primary maps. One is the map that we showed you, if you want to go back to slide 11, Bree, it's the colored map, the sort of live map that you can find your way and wayfinding and navigation across campus. And then there is a PDF map that is about accessibility, and it points out which pathways are sort of the best for transversing the campus and which doors on buildings are accessible. That, as in the recommendations for the transition plan, is to update that. Our goal is to have the online electronic campus map try to provide as much information all on one map as we can do about accessibility information. So yes, we plan to do that, and we're hopeful that that's one of our top priorities. It's going to take a little bit of time, but we are going to do that.
I'm going to go dig up the barrier to report link really quick if you want to answer another question. Just so you know what I'm doing. I'm going to pop up on my screen. Yeah.
So there's a question about funding allocation from Washington State specifically dedicated to ADA renovations? And the answer is no. Typically, the state doesn't do that kind of work. It's usually for a capital project, and the funding for renovation or maintenance is in one pot, and that needs to be spread around, and it's a little bit thin for doing that. I don't want to delve down into a whole discussion about state funding and how that works, but it's not specifically allocated that in that manner.
Yeah.
Here's a question about areas and walkways that e-scooters are banned from. Transportation Services is working with the vendors that provide the e-scooters and rideshare bikes of zones on campus where those are not allowed. We also have concerns about sharing those kind of equipment with people that are walking or transversing in another way. So that some of the basically the permitting for those to be on campus, we're working with them so that they're contained. I don't know the current status of that, but I think it's nearly complete.
Yeah, I believe you're using, I don't know if you mentioned it, but geofencing, they're going to be, they'll have a way to work with the companies. Like, yeah, I think you mentioned this, maybe not, but so it'll slow down or turn off the scooter, which is pretty cool. Okay. When a space needs to be upgraded to be ADA accessible, who is responsible for the cost of those upgrades? So that's going to be dependent on the project itself. So if it's a new construction, we're tearing down a building or redeveloping a site, it's all part of that the capital project money and budget for that and the design. So this is probably a question more likely to or more close to a renovation or remodel, I'm guessing. And that money, the source of that money can come from donors, it can come from a submission to a capital project, it can come from other sources, but the overall budget will need to, if there's an accessible, if there's a gap or a known barrier that we're addressing, the budget will need to cover or have a way to cover that. If there's not a MAF, like I mentioned, a maximum extent feasible issue present in these old or current state buildings. Within the ADA code, there's pieces around if you are working in a primary use area and you have to look at your path of travel to it. So all these parameters to that in terms of a renovation or remodel, and it can up to 20% of the budget would need to be considered making ADA improvements if all of these variables fit into what the project is going to be doing and where in the building or what programs is it going to be impacted by. So there's kind of a gray answer, hopefully with a little bit of detail, but it's up to the project budget. Another code question.
There's a question about how do we know when facilities are meeting the code or they're code compliant? And so we have people that are skilled with ADA surveying, UW staff as well as consultants, and we have design review of the designs of facilities as well as measuring and checking that code compliance as things are being constructed.
Did that answer that other question in there too? The Ramada buildings?
Yep.
So in terms of the last question noted here, can an ADA student be a participant on the campus planning to give better insights? That's a great question. Sometimes based off the project, there may be inputs that starts from the beginning, or the whatever unit is contributing to the design or funding. There could be input there as well. So for example, Founders Hall, that's a project that was brought about through the business school, and people and participants who use those services, right, might have gotten opportunity to give feedback through that process. I'm just speaking here generically in the answer. When we redo some engineering spaces, there's a potential that there'll be feedback in those spaces because these are driven so much by departments. There could be internal feedback provided by those units who are funding and seeking the changes, for sure. If you certainly have feedback or concerns broadly speaking, I mean, as the ADA coordinator, I'm always happy to hear and talk with interested folks about where they think there are barriers that we need to address. So there's an avenue through me as well, if not through the specific project. The project owner, I guess, is the word I'm looking for there. New question. So if the funding is thin, what does a timeline look like for getting these things done? How long can we expect to wait for a more accessible campus?
Yeah, we're going to be there is currently ongoing, anytime there is a barrier to access report that goes into facilities through the customer care team. Those are always analyzed for immediate accommodation, or what can be, if there's something that can be done immediately. And then we have, as I described, the 4 different ways: maintenance, renovations, major projects, and specialty projects. Every year those are happening. So every year there's more accessibility that is provided on campus, and that will continue. It is unclear how long that will take at this time. Funding cycles are different over time, and it's a high priority for accessibility when we do any projects with the funding that we have.
For sure. If you haven't been on campus yet, or when you do return to visit, there definitely have been improvements that have been made over this year in terms of parking lots, as I mentioned, and there's some pathways that are connected to those specific parking lots. And then our new buildings that have opened up. Unfortunately, not everybody has been able to be here yet to see them, but the population health building improved access up from 15th up to architecture, which is a significant grade there. We worked with a great local consultant, ADA consultant, and accessibility consultant to ensure that to happen. Brick Museum parking lot also improved some pathways. Trying to think of the other one that
the N22 parking lot just north of the hub. That whole parking lot was redone, as well as the pathways to about 5 different buildings surrounding that. And all of the North Campus housing, Willow, Madrona, McCarty, Oak Hall, that was completed this year. All of that whole area. The residence halls in the West Campus. There's several, as these projects go along, there's significant renovation and changes to the interiors as well as the exteriors surrounding these facilities. So every year there's more and more improvements.
That's where the mapping does come into play here, because as the map can get updated and information can be shared more clearly as we try to navigate campus either north to south or east to west. And there are features like using buildings to navigate inclines or elevations. That information will be more readily available. So if someone is planning a trip here, either as a visitor to performance or to come to watch an event of some fashion, speaking or commencement down a few years down the road, maybe, they'll be able to make a plan for how to wayfind from where they're going to start on campus to where they want to go. And that's using the dial-a-ride as a drop-off or parking, or our pathway circulation network. All these features will be able to better inform somebody looking to clear wayfinding, understanding to limit any impact, either distance or because you could have fatigue over a distance, or having to navigate elevation. So that's where that recommendation for updated campus wayfinding ties directly to our barrier removal, so things can be shared, things are updated, for sure. Because like Julian mentioned, there's probably 4 or 5 things that have happened just the past year while folks have been off campus, and so if people return, knowing how to use these new accessible features and pathways.
All right, well, so thank you everybody for your questions. Is there anyone that wants to raise their hand? We can unmute you for speaking. Otherwise, we'll just give you another minute or so to type or raise your hand. Really appreciate all the questions and having you spend a little time with us on this. And if you think of other things, you have the connection to the websites.
Just going to end on program use by type, just because I wanted to.
All right. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your afternoon and evening, and appreciate all the feedback. Bye-bye.